It's Paul Ducklin here from Naked Security at Sophos. Today's topic, as you can see from the title, is when you turn off a web server, can it still come back to haunt you? And the reason that I want to look at this topic today is it was one of the popular articles of the past week on Naked Security, based on some research by a US security analyst called Zach Edwards, who found 250 different domains. These, in his case, they were all hosted on Microsoft Azure, but this could happen on any hosting provider, basically, where somebody's domain, like example.com, where a server under that domain suddenly got owned by the crooks without the server actually getting hacked. So how on earth can that happen? Let's look into what happened in that case and what you or your friends or somebody you know runs a small business, the mistakes they might make that could mean that when you discontinue an old web server, it could still come back to haunt you. Karen, yikes. Christopher, yes. I guess that means yes, you can hear me. Great. So the story that Zach Edwards was tweeting about, as I say, that related to Microsoft Azure, but the story goes around how domain names, server names on the internet work. So if you visited nakedsecurity.sophos.com, you'll know that Sophos, understandably, owns or has the right to use sophos.com. Now, if ever we let that domain expire, what will happen is that the domain registrar would say, hey, are you sure? Was that a mistake? They give you a little bit of time to make up for mistakes. And if not, they're allowed to sell the domain to somebody else. But you can go and look up then, if we lost sophos.com, then you could go and look it up and you'd see it no longer belongs to Sophos Limited, it actually belongs to a completely different company. So the buck sort of starts and stops for sophos.com with Sophos at that sophos.com domain. But under that, you'll know we have www.sophos.com, partners.sophos.com, nakedsecurity.sophos.com and news.sophos.com. Now those are hosted elsewhere. So once we own sophos.com, or in your case, if you own your brand name.example, then essentially you can do what you like. You get the right to all the names underneath that, the things that come before that last .yourbrand.example. Now the problem is that in the old days it was kind of quite easy, wasn't it? If you set up servers for yourself, typically you might have an FTP server, a mail server and a web server. You probably kept them separate because servers weren't that powerful in those days. There was no virtualization. There were no hosting companies, or there were very few. So you might set up 3 small servers and you'd set up mail.yourbrand.example, www.yourbrand.example and ftp.yourbrand.example. And those 3 servers would exist under your master brand. These days things are a little different, because often what companies, small, medium and large, want to do is create things that are typically known in the jargon as microsites. So they figure, I know, we're coming out of lockdown, I want to try and ramp up business a bit. I'm going to have August 2020 special offer, .yourbrand.example. And instead of setting up a server of your own, what you can do, because you get to decide what happens with that domain name, that server name, August 2020 special offer, you can actually point that name to somebody else's server if you want. For example, you could get a third-party site, a third-party company that does cool branding and marketing and site design to set up a server, say temporarily, maybe on Microsoft Azure or in Google's cloud or somewhere like that. And what you do is you make a subdomain of your main brand point to somebody else's server while you're doing your August 2020 special offer. It all works great. You get a ramp in traffic. You see that traffic going along. And then at the end you think, okay, the offer's over. I don't need that server anymore. There's no point in carrying on paying some third-party company to run this microsite for me, even though it fits under my domain. What I'll do is let's turn the server off. Now, there's no problem with doing that. The worst that can happen if the server goes dead is people who click the link at a later stage will see server not found. Karen, I wish you could see here what I do. Oh golly, I thought you meant the other way around. I still can't hear you. Let's get on to that later, Karen, if you don't mind. So basically, the deal is that if you farm out a subdomain from your main brand domain to somebody else for a short period, when you turn that server off, when you retire that server, which is not just as simple as switching off one of the servers in your own rack these days, if you do not also go into your DNS records, your name index that says this is where you find my various servers, and retire the DNS record as well, then you may end up with a DNS record that points to a subdomain name of your brand that actually ends up in an alias, somebody else's server name or somebody else's IP number that you no longer own or control. Now, typically what will happen for a while is that server just simply won't work. People will get an error, server not found, and they'll think, oh well, August 2020 offer, obviously it's all over, and they won't think any more of it. But what seems to have happened in the example that Zach Edwards discovered was one or more, probably perhaps just one criminal gang was making a habit of going through domain names that still showed up in the DNS list. So they still showed up. They obviously weren't owned and operated by the exact same company that owned the brand. They pointed out somewhere else, typically somewhere into the cloud, and were dead. And then the crooks took over that name or that IP number so well as they could. In other words, from that moment on, the crooks basically control a tiny little bit of your business empire because you're referring to a server that you no longer control, and now the crooks do. And those DNS records, those server name records, which go somewhere that they shouldn't, they're known as dangling DNS records for obvious reasons. And when you've got a dangling record, it's like forwarding your phone number to somebody else's mobile temporarily and then forgetting to unforward it. From then on, you won't receive the calls anymore. They will. And if they lose control of their number and somebody else gets it, you have no idea who's receiving those calls. It's the same kind of idea. And so the problem with these dangling DNS records is A, the crooks can use automated techniques to find out where they are. They look through known server names that you've used. They see the ones that go to infrastructure that you don't own, that used to work, that doesn't work, and they go and see if they can register those names and take them over. And once they do, then A, people who visit those old links will actually suddenly arrive at a criminal site, which will be a little bit of a shock for them. And B, those crooks are basically stealing your goodwill, your brand, and your reputation. And once it's burned and your domain is on all the block lists, then you're the one left essentially carrying the baby. The crooks move on to someone else, your reputation is ruined, you're probably on block lists, and now you need to get off. And it all happens because you switch off a server, the server goes dead, but the signposts that point to that server are no longer dead, and somebody can build a new village in the empty location where those signposts still point. Teresa says, in addition to your animated delivery, it would be helpful if you had illustrations. We've thought of that, Teresa. Thinking of finding a way to do that. Maybe I could hold up cards or in the past I've used a mobile phone where I hold it up which has little pictures on. That hasn't worked while I was outside doing the socially distanced Facebook lives. Maybe we can do more indoor stuff now that social distancing is regulations are relieving a little bit in the UK. The problem with holding up a phone that shows an image outside for live is that generally when the sun shines you can't see the screen, all you can see is reflection of it. So maybe in the future what we can do is have some props that we hold up, because what you can't do in a Facebook Live of course is keep cutting and pasting. The idea is meant to be live, it's meant to be done with a mobile phone, it's meant to be a bit of good, clean, short fun, and it's not meant to be super slick and professional where you keep cutting to studios and cutting to different backdrops and so forth. But I'll certainly give it a go. So where were we? We had a server that you were going to run for a month or so for a special offer. You had a special name that was underneath your brand, so it was recognizably yours, but it pointed off somewhere else into the cloud to a server that someone else is running for your brief period. You'd put up a signpost with your brand name on it, basically, August 2020 offer.me. Come here, folks. You can trust it because it's me. You took the server away, you left the signpost pointing there, and you also left, if you like, a camping ground spot where the crooks could spring up later. So your domain name, your server name, suddenly points to where the crooks are. And the bad news about that, of course, is that the crooks have essentially hacked your brand and taken over a server that you thought you didn't have anymore, even though they haven't had to hack into anything. So, 3 tips for what you can do about it. Let's go through them. So the first one is If you're running your own DNS server, or if you've got a provider who provides you with DNS, that's where you have names that you use for your brands that point at your servers. You need to review those regularly, and you need to make sure you don't have redundant entries in there that are signposts, as I said, that point to empty spaces where the crooks can suddenly pop up and pretend to be you. So DNS records, they're very important because although they're not actually servers, they point at places where people assume that you are in control and therefore that they can trust with your brand on. The second thing I would recommend is most DNS providers these days provide various levels of lockdown that you can, various sort of dials that you can turn up to enforce stricter and stricter lockdown on your DNS records to make it harder for crooks to get in and just change them willy-nilly, because that's another way a DNS hijack happens. Rather than you just leaving a server signpost pointing somewhere else, the crooks break in and they turn, that was supposed to be a squeaky metal joint, by the way. They turn that signpost to point to one of theirs. So lock down your DNS records so that they're harder for you to change, but much, much harder for the crooks to change. And in particular, if you can, get some kind of two-factor authentication on there. And my last tip is many providers, Microsoft Azure is a case in point, following Zach Edwards' tweet, they put out some advice on what you can do with their service. Other providers will have something similar. They have options that you can build into your Microsoft Azure temporary server workflow, if you like, that makes it very hard for you to retire a server without retiring the associated DNS record first. The option, I forget the actual name of the option. Go to nakedsecurity.sophos.com, search for web names hijacked, and you can get some more details in there. But the idea is when you say, I don't want this server anymore, please retire it, I don't want that server running in the Microsoft Azure cloud, then it won't let you remove it until you first remove the DNS record, which makes sure that you can't have a dangling record. It forces you to do things in the right order. It doesn't force you to stick with Microsoft forever and ever. It just makes sure that you can't retire the server without retiring the signpost at the same time. And there are other tools, including Sophos's own Sophos Cloud Optics, that can do a very similar thing. They establish a workflow that says when you want to do something to this particular server in the cloud, in particular when you want to make that server stop functioning and go away, you can't get to this point in your workflow in your click delete before you've actually got all your other ducks in a row. I'm allowed to say that, but you aren't. So thanks for listening, folks. If you do run servers, if you do have DNS records, please take care of them, because they are a way that crooks can effectively hack your server without hacking the server physically in the first place. And even if you think you're done with the server and you've turned yours off, they could spring up another server that suddenly takes over your goodwill and your brand. So stay safe out there, folks. If your country is beginning to relieve its lockdown like is happening in the UK, don't go too crazy. Remember that the virus hasn't gone away, just some of the regulations have. So stay healthy, stay safe, and until next time, stay secure too.